Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're going to talk about the ramifications, the responsibilities, the obligations of creating life, because that's what Dungeons and Dragons is about. It is really like it never ceases to astound me the breadth of Dungeons and Dragons. It truly is a simulation for exploring literally all aspects of humanity. So I've been running a Strixhaven campaign series, a series of campaigns. The first was the Strixhaven book itself. It was taking 4 player characters from first level to 10th level as Strixhaven students. They're coming up from being initiates, Strixhaven initiates, to Strixhaven apprentices, to Strixhaven pledge mages, and then graduating from Strixhaven. And then there was a Strixhaven Adventure series where those Strixhaven graduates went to Saltmarsh and became smugglers and had a lot of adventures as powerful Strixhaven casters, right? So as a bard and as an artificer and as a wizard, so lots of Strixhaven caster action as adventurers. And then finally, once those player characters had went from level 10 to level 15 as adventurers, they returned to Strixhaven for a final campaign series, which is actually ending tonight. Right, we're actually wrapping it up tonight with our final session. And so basically, they came back as professors, right? And so I'm dealing with. We had one player character hit 20th level, and we have another player character at 19th level, which will almost certainly hit 20th level tonight, right? And that's what I want to talk about today. That player character, it's played by our dedicated player, and the player character is Riul, an elf artificer who is specifically in Prismari, which is the art college of Strixhaven. And Professor Riul at this point, he has his own personal Chewbacca, that's another thing I've been absolutely astounded at. It's just the Chewbacca character is so fascinating and interesting, and I really love the Chewbacca as a what do you do when you have someone who is, or you have a structure of a partnership, but one of the members of that partnership is actually like the subordinate member of the partnership, but may actually be skilled and morally a better person than the primary. When you have someone who has more skill, talent, and morals than the primary person, but they follow, and the worst person is the leader, almost like an allegory for American power structures. Really, really fascinating. Also reminds me deeply of Phileas Fogg and Passepartout. That's a deep, deep relationship, which I think is much more winsomely presented in Han Solo Chewbacca. And Riul and Glaive. So Riul is an elf artificer, Strixhaven professor, and he has this Chewbacca named Glaive, who is this Warforged, who he defeated the Warforged evil wizard master, and became kind of like his Han Solo, and Glaive goes with Riul, right? So Glaive and Riul have a deep relationship, right? They trust one another. Glaive has protected Riul for a long time. Riul has sacrificed a lot of equipment and money to build a strong relationship. And the two of them are essentially partners, but with a clear leader-follower dynamic. Exactly like Han Solo and Chewbacca, and also I'm really excited that Dungeons and Dragons and Strixhaven, because it has higher mechanical complexity, has allowed me to learn a lot more about the Han Solo Chewbacca relationship, seeing it completely mirrored by 2 other Dungeons and Dragons player characters and a non-player character. Really fascinating. So Glaive is at Strixhaven. And essentially what Glaive does is he anticipates what is needed by the player character, Professor Riul, and answers questions that Riul has about his surroundings. He's dedicated. He does a lot of essentially spying and, or I would say observing is a better word. But it's really really fascinating, just everything that's happening. So one of the things so Glaive goes to Riul and he says, hey, come take a look at this piece of art. They're in Prismari, so they see these amazing pieces of art created by magical artists, right, all the time. So he brings Professor Riul to this point, and he shows him this three-dimensional sculpture, right? And it's essentially bars of glass and iron. It's bars of glass, bars of iron, and bars of silver, right? And they actually are magically crafted so that they show the blue and the red of Prismari, and they float above this center stone and almost like a wind chime would, just kind of circling, or like a mobile circling around, right? And so Glaive the Warforged brings Professor Riul and he says, hey, I want you to look at this carefully, look at this piece of art. And he says, just stand here for a moment, watch it spin, and just watch carefully, right? And there's a point where the piece of art spins and it actually locks into place, right? Or actually, it doesn't stop spinning, but from one perspective, from one vantage, you can see it creates a humanoid form with legs, a torso, arms, and a head, right? And it's only glimpsed for a second, right? And then and if it continues to spin around, right, it just goes into these amorphous forms, right? And so only by looking at this thing at a particular vantage, at a particular perspective, can you see that there's a humanoid form depicted in this moving piece of art, right? Moving both literally and figuratively, right? And so Glaive says, listen, I was forged. I was created by humans on Eberron, right? The Dragon Mark houses. And there were actually other humanoids. There were elves and dwarves involved as well. But my people, the Warforged, were forged for war, right? And there are thousands of us, and we are all over the realms, right? We spell jam from realm to realm. We travel. We use gate. We hire wizards to gate us to different realms. We have all these places where we are, doing our thing, and we're contributing members of society. But we were forged for war, and it has affected every aspect of my life. I was created to destroy things, right? But Professor Riul, we've had a relationship as adventurers together for some time right now, and I've seen your power as an artificer. I know what you can do, right? But the only thing you haven't done is you haven't forged life, right? You forged lots of magical items. You've helped your other friends, right, by creating magic items, improving the magic items they already have, right? And but the one thing you haven't done is you've never magically created a form of life, right? You've never created a sentient being. You've never forged a being, right? A real, magical, living, sentient, deciding, emoting being. And I want you to. This piece of art deserves to live. It should be the first art forged. I am one of many warforged, but I'm asking you, Professor Riul, to create the first art forge. A sentient being created out of art for a purpose it will decide on its own. You're not going to forge it for war, and you will not have a purpose when this is forged. We will forge this because its beauty demands it to be forged and created. So, what I just told you, this is going to be given to the dedicated player who runs Riul tonight, right? And I don't know what his decision is going to be, but I do know this. I now realize Dungeons & Dragons puts every dungeon master, if you remain dedicated to the game, and you run player characters from 1 to 20, you will come across the question of how is life created, when should life be created, and once life is created, what are the obligations, what are the responsibilities, what are the ramifications of creating life. Incredible, right? Truly incredible, right? And I really, I think this is a really amazing question, right? And I don't know what the dedicated player is going to answer, but I do know, right, that Dungeons and Dragons puts dungeon masters in the situation where we must prepare for the creation of life. It puts us literally in the position of a deity, right? Like, God created Earth in 7 days, and He had questions, right? He had to give answers. He had to know the responsibility. He had to know the ramifications, right? He had to think carefully as He created life. We get all those same questions just preparing for when a player character will decide to create life or not to create life and allow life to never be manifested. It is incredibly deep, and the ramifications of it are massive, right? And what it tells us is that do not dare proceed into Dungeons and Dragons to cut goblins in half, because if you read the book and you participate in Dungeons and Dragons, you will be asked to answer the questions of deities. You will be asked to understand the ramifications, the responsibilities, the obligations of creating life, right? And I've had to prepare and think deeply about these questions. I think I'm ready to put this story in front of my player character. But when my dedicated player is given this decision, right, there will be profound, implications. He will have to, if he puts this into position in the Strixhaven world, in the Dungeons and Dragons world, the Dungeons and Dragons realms are forever changed with the art forged. What beauty will they bring forward? What horrors will they bring forward? Who will be responsible for their actions? I've had to ask these questions. I've had to put forward answers. And tonight, one of the players is going to have to deal with the ramifications, the decisions, the thought processes, the emotion, right, of creating life. And it is the meanings are profound and force me to think beyond the small, limited scope of my own life and think to realms, universes beyond. It's incredible, right? Like, Dungeons and Dragons demands. It says your ignorance will no longer be tolerated. You must be thinking quickly, deeply, fully, right? And the ramifications, the obligations, and the responsibilities of that thought are very real, right? And the first thing that's going to happen is your mind and your heart is going to be expanded as a person who has participated in Dungeons and Dragons. And you are going to pose questions to people that they never thought they would be answering, right? And first, all of it will happen in the D&D world. But what happens in the D&D world does not stay in the D&D world. It impacts IRL. We've seen that deeply. We've seen that directly. And thousands of millions of very real IRL lives are deeply, fundamentally impacted by the questions that are answered and asked at the table. So I just wanted to share this with you, and I'm really curious. Like, I've reached this juncture because I have interacted with Amanda Heyman's high complexity Strixhaven Dungeons and Dragons world, because Dungeons and Dragons is shaped like no other tabletop role-playing game in the world and allows these deep and profound questions to be asked to the Dungeon Master and extending out to the player character, right? I've had to really think. I've had to dive deep into philosophy, right? What have you hit? What have you discovered? What questions have been asked and answered at your table that have stretched your emotional and your intellectual limits, right? And what changes are you making in your IRL life, and how are you manifesting different decisions and different life platforms and different life patterns because of your participation in Dungeons & Dragons? I'd love to hear all of that. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing. Have a wonderful millennium.